Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more trustees to show.
So Mary Kate,
Yes.
may I call to see if the NECHE team members are all in?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm admitting one more. So NECHE team, welcome.
Thank you.
Just let me know, let me call your name. Dr. Hopper, hi. Is Dr. Hopper already in?
Dr. Hopper's already in.
Okay, thank you. So Charles Cleary.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi. Rosemary Costigan.
Here.
Thank you. Sarah Gagger, I saw her.
Here.
Yes, thank you. Gary Garside.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Dr. Can. Dr. Can. I think I saw his
Liaquat, I don't know if I've seen him on here yet.
Yes, I think I see him.
I thought I admitted him, yes.
Liaquat? Yes.
Yes. And Dr. Milner, I saw you. Yes, thank you. Let me see, Sandra Remetz. And Elena Quiroz.
Buenas tardes.
Hi, buenas tardes. So we're just missing Sandra, right? Thank you all.
And Nanette, it looks like we have all of the trustees. I'm just double checking.
Okay, so let me check. I don't see Sandra Remetz. So Dr. Hopper, is it okay to
Yes,
start? Or should we
Sandra said she might be delayed a little bit, so it's
Okay.
okay without her.
So I'll let her in as soon.
That'd be great.
Great.
Is that okay with you? Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Mary Kate Murn. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees. I call to order the special meeting of the Board of Trustees for Monday, April 12th, 2021. Nanette, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mary Kate Murin.
Present.
Janae McDonald.
Present.
Elizabeth Esposito.
Present.
Thank you. Alexander Anderson. Maurice Lindsay.
Present.
Vicky Kraus.
Present.
Bill Johnson.
Present.
Jeff Sattler.
Present.
And Max Starks.
Present.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this special meeting. I have the privilege and the honor to introduce Dr. Richard Hopper, who is our visiting team chair from New England Commission of Higher Education. And Dr. Hopper, I just want to turn it right over to you. I know, and welcome you officially. I know we spent some time last night meeting and doing, unfortunately, a virtual meet and greet, but wanted to turn it directly over to you now to speak directly to the STIC Board of Trustees.
Great. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me clearly.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for welcoming us to your board meeting. We're very grateful to be here, and I'm very proud of the team that we've assembled from NECHE for this accreditation visit. This is a 10-year visit. Accreditation is done every 10 years. And I will let each of my team members who's here, Sandra Rimetz, will come in a little bit late, but I'll let each of the team members announce their own name and the institution they're from and the name, the number and name of the standard they cover. So I will start first with Rosemary Costigan. Rosemary, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Rosemary Costigan. I am the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Community College of Rhode Island, and I am lead for Standard 3, Governance and Organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Sarah Gager.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Gager. I'm the Dean of Student Affairs at Naugatuck Valley Community College down in Waterbury, Connecticut, and I am the Standard 5 students.
Thanks, Sarah. Next up is Barry Garside. Barry.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barry Garside. I'm the Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs at Nashua Community College in New Hampshire. Prior to that, I was the chair of the mathematics department. And I am I'm working on Standard 8, which is educational effectiveness.
Thanks, Barry. Next up is Chuck.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chuck Clary. I'm the Dean of Student Affairs at Tungus Community College in Farmington, Connecticut, and I am lead on Standard 7 institutional resources.
Thanks, Chuck. Next up is Liaquat Khan. Oh. There we go. Having a little technical difficulty, perhaps?
Yes. Hello.
There we go. Now we can hear you. Thank you, Liaquat.
Okay. Sorry for that. I'm Liaquat Khan. I'm with NHTI in Concord, New Hampshire. I'm a department chair for architectural engineering, civil engineering, and landscape programs. And I'm doing Standard 4, the academic program. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.
Next is Tanya Milner. Tanya.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya Milner. I am Associate Vice President of Teaching and Learning for the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities in Hartford, Connecticut. I am leading Standard 2, planning and evaluation.
Thank you. And I believe Sandra's just joined us.
Yes, I am. I'm here. Are we good? Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, good. Hi, I'm Professor Sandra Rimetz from Manchester Community College, and my focus is on Standard 6.
Thank you, Sandra. And we also have a visitor on our team, an observer, Elena Quiroz-Livanes. Elena?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Elena Quiroz-Livanes, and I'm the Chief of Staff and Assistant Commissioner for Academic Policy and Student Success at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. Good afternoon.
Excellent. So that is the team that you have. This is an excellent team. This is my 4th time chairing for NECHE. My name is Richard Hopper, and I'm the president of Kennebec Valley Community College in Fairfield, Maine. This is my 8th year as president, just finishing up, and I have my 9th commencement in a couple of weeks. So I've been in this business for a little while. And this is, accreditation is near and dear to my heart. I've been working on accreditation long before I became a college president. And it's something that I find to be very important. In the international world of higher education, it's referred to as quality assurance. So to assure the quality of institutions and their academic programs and their operations. And I think that's a really apt term for accreditation. Accreditation in different languages means different things. For some, in some languages, the word means just license to operate. But in the United States, it really does come down to assuring quality to make sure that the quality is sufficient enough to be Title IV eligible, meaning that you are eligible for federal funds for student financial aid and the like, and to be able to apply for federal grants and those sorts of things. So accreditation is a carrot and a stick all at once. So we all go through this every 10 years. Another purpose of accreditation is for us to be self-regulated. So NECHE is a voluntary organization, meaning we all volunteer. None of us is being paid for a time. We do this because we expect our colleagues to also volunteer when it comes time for us to be accredited, whether in the 10-year review, a 5-year review, a special review, or in the case, I'm on the board of an institution that is just being created. So it's in candidacy status, not my institution, but I sit on another board, the board of another institution that is currently in candidacy phase. And that's been an interesting process for me. I've never been involved in candidacy before. So there are all kinds of purposes and needs for accreditation. Accreditation, because it happens every 10 years, can feel very episodic. It can feel kind of like a big push. The whole institution has to drop everything and gather data and write a self-study. And it can feel very high stakes because it actually is high stakes. The results of accreditation are important for a lot of reasons, one of which is money. It's also important for consumers so that people have information about your operations and whether or not it meets a certain standard. There are questions about whether accreditation is about improving quality or whether it's about just assessing to make sure that it's a minimum quality. And I think there are some arguments to be discussed for both. Our sense for this team and for others is to make sure that your institution is fit for purpose. This concept, fitness for purpose, is very important. We talked today about Standard 1, which is the standard I'm in charge of, or leading, I suppose we say, that it is for mission and purposes, plural. We are all held to the same standards, whether we are Harvard, Yale, Kennebec Valley Community College, STIC, or UMass Amherst, for instance. We all live by the same 9 standards, and this can often be confusing to some folks. How is it that you can be judged by the same standards as a comprehensive doctoral institution? And the answer is in our mission and purposes. And the question is, are we fit, or are you fit? Is STCC fit for the purpose for which it exists? So we start from the basis of your purpose and mission, and we look at this very closely. And as I spoke with Dr. Cook this morning and with your faculty today, we talked about this mission. And it's interesting, in Massachusetts, you have a statewide mission that the institution must follow, but then it also has its institution level mission and purpose. So we were looking and dissecting a bit what those different pieces are and what they mean, and the fact that you're coming into new strategic planning process and how important that is, because that's the springboard from which you will do all of the other work over the coming years. So we are here to look at the various standards and to look at, to assure quality and to foster improvement. And some of that fostering of improvement is looking at making sure you have processes and procedures in place for self-evaluation, for program evaluation, a chance to do data-informed management and decision-making, whether it's with regard to academic programs, finances, or others. This fitness for purpose is also important for each of the standards. And if we apply that to each standard, we can ask ourselves the question, when it comes to finances and resources, does STCC have adequate financing and resources to achieve its stated purposes and mission? Does STCC have an adequate array of academic programs that cover the areas in which it says it is intending to serve the public? Are there adequate supports for students to make sure that they can succeed in their academic programs and hopefully in their life pursuits once graduating, and those sorts of things? So this is where fitness for purpose becomes very important. So again, NECHE does accreditation every 10 years. We do a 5-year interim visit. And sometimes if there are specific problems, there's sometimes a 1-year or 2-year check-in to make sure things are moving along. And generally, NECHE requires an annual report. And there are also special visits or focused visits. And there's also substantive change. So when an institution applies for substantive change, this generally is when you want to, as an institution, either create new programs that are outside of the norm, or maybe to shift to online or remote delivery, or to open a second campus or third satellite, or whatever it is that institutions do that require a proposal for substantive change and then a subsequent visit by officials as designated by NECHE. Understanding that NECHE is a regional accreditation agency. There are 6 regional accreditation agencies in the United States, and every institution to be Title IV eligible should be accredited by a regional accreditor, although some are allowed to have specialized accreditation. And there are about 60 specialized accreditors. And many institutions are accredited by both their regional accreditors, such as NECHE would accredit STIC, but then there are academic programs within your repertoire that are covered by a specialized accreditor. Perhaps ASIN covers your nursing program or other areas. You probably have, if you have emergency medicine, there's a specialized agency that reviews that. So I like to think of them as vertical accrediting processes, which accredit the entire institution, and then horizontal accreditation processes that accredit and assure the quality of academic programs. NECHE is recognized by 2 authorities. One is a government authority and the other is a non-government authority. The government authority is the U.S. Department of Education, and they have a bureau inside accreditors. And NECHE is reviewed by NECHE, and it also receives a green light to operate as a regional accreditor. But it's also recognized by CHIA, the Council on Higher Education Accreditation, which is a nonprofit membership organization to which all of the accreditation agencies belong. And CHIA also does an assessment of NECHE and other regional accreditors and specialized accreditors to make sure that they are recognized by that authority. So there are 2 recognition authorities. It's a fairly complex system, but it's a system that works in the United States. We have 7,000 colleges and universities, but there are more accredited institutions that are not necessarily colleges and universities. But among those 4,500 colleges and universities, there are aspects of NECHE and this sort of accreditation is that it is considered self-regulation to the extent that we don't want to be regulated by the federal government or the state government necessarily in a very profound way. This allows us to have a little more freedom in regulating ourselves. Of course, we all know that there are federal and state rules and guidelines, and this is not as much under certain laws or certain regulations or guidelines. So, but it does give us a certain amount of ability to assess ourselves. There is some criticism of the fact that we look at under each other's hood and we assess each other and accredit each other in many ways. But I feel very confident, having been in this business for a long time and having been accredited and having served on accreditation visiting teams, that this process is quite thorough. And I feel very confident, especially with the team such as the one we have today, that we're going to be, I feel very confident in the determinations that we'll make on the 9 standards that you've heard about today. Let me see if there's anything else I need to tell you. NECHE reviews standards every several years, and it used to be when I first standards at that time around 2012, and now we have 9. And this is from a process of dialogue that NECHE has with higher education institutions, whether it's the leaders or the administration. NECHE also talks to faculty and students to look at how to, what the standards are, how they will be assessed, and what it is that NECHE is looking for. And then beyond that, so the standards that we currently have now, there are 9, and you've heard their mission and purposes, which is a standard over which I am lording in this process. Then there's planning and evaluation, operation and governance, the academic program, students, teaching, learning, and scholarship, institutional resources, educational effectiveness, and the final, which is cross-cutting across all of the other 8 standards, integrity, transparency, and public disclosure. So these are all very important. And it used to be that we had a standard on the library. We used to have a standard on information technology, and all of those have been sort of compressed into resources or other standards. So it used to be more parsed out, and now it's more pulled together in bigger lumps. But the sub areas are still there, and those sub paragraphs are things that we still need to continue to look at. Your institution has completed a self-study for which we have all been quite impressed. Impressed not only in the data that need to be in the report, but also the data that are provided that were not necessarily required, as well as the narrative and information that's in there, and the story that it's telling us. We're able to get a better sense of the institution. The one thing that I noticed and several of the team members have raised is that the self-study done by Stcc has been very forthcoming, very frank, with lots of candor. And I find this to be really helpful, really constructive, because it allows us to ask questions about things without having to try to discover what some of the issues are. I, as the chair, visit the institution the year prior to the visit, and I meet with the president and with the team that was putting together the self-study. And one thing I always tell teams in advance is we all have issues and problems. We all have challenges. Talk about them, acknowledge them, and discuss your ways or your plans for addressing them. And that's really the key. The key isn't that you have problems or that you have issues, or all of our institutions do. The question is, do you have a plan for addressing them? Do you have a strategy? And if not, maybe through this process, you can think about it and we can help you think about how you might address these issues. So we found the study to be very forthcoming and informative. And today we met with various groups, and I have to say the groups that I met with were extremely forthcoming, very honest. And I felt quite a bit of candor from the groups, which was really, really important. This is very unusual to meet with a group of trustees in a public forum that's broadcast. I've never done this before. Usually I do this in a closed session or in a small group. To hear with a certain amount of candor, I feel that sometimes media will prevent a certain level of candor. So I am not concerned, but I'm a little, I'm very realistic about the level of candor that I can possibly expect in a public forum versus one that is closed to the public, where we may hear more detail on things that we might otherwise not have. But I understand your need for the public forum. The fact that you have a quorum in your group is what I'm told, and that this is being broadcast publicly. And I respect that 100%. We all have our various laws and sunshine laws that we need to respect. So I fully respect what it is, the rules under which you are operating. So we generally have a peer review team, which is made up of the folks that you've met. And generally from like institutions, it's very unlikely that one of us will be on the review team for a large comprehensive doctoral institution, and it's very unlikely that someone from one of those institutions will be on one of our review boards. The sense is to have people who more or less understand your world on the team, and I believe that we have that in this group. We also check for conflicts of interest from every group member beforehand, and if anyone has a conflict of interest, they must signal it. And conflicts of interest sometimes mean that people cannot participate in the review, or it means they simply, conflicts of interest must be managed if there are any. There have been none that have been brought to my attention with this group visiting Stcc. I personally have no conflicts of interest, and no one in the group has divulged any conflict of interest, and this is all checked well in advance. And I have been on teams before where someone had a spouse or someone they knew or had once worked at an institution and recused themselves from being on that group because they felt that there was a conflict of interest, and I always respect that decision. Each of our team members has a certain deep level of expertise, whether it's in the academic program, student affairs, data collection and management, whether it's academic programming, information technology. Everybody has a different level of expertise in a specialized area. So they bring not only their general sense of how institutions operate, but they also bring a very clear set of expertise and senior level expertise to the group. There are 2 folks on our team this year who are doing for the first time their visit. And this, I think, is a wonderful thing. We could not do accreditation without volunteers, such as the group that I have here. And I would encourage Stcc to encourage its faculty and staff and senior level administrators to participate in a NECHE accreditation team. It is, I think, one of the best forms of professional development you can have, particularly for senior administrators and faculty, where you can actually go and look at another institution, look under the hood, talk to people. You can actually empathize and even sympathize quite closely with people at other institutions and the things that they're going through. All of us in particular in the COVID and the pandemic environment, we've all had to transition to doing a great deal of remote learning. It's been a real challenge for community colleges, more so than some of the research or liberal arts institutions, because we do so much hands-on learning. We do so many labs. You can't learn to weld online. You can't learn to be a nurse online. You have to do these things in person. And I think community colleges have suffered tremendously during the pandemic because we lack the hands-on component in much of what we're doing, or if we have the hands-on component, it's very stylized and almost unnatural in certain instances. We have smaller groups. Everything's done with a social distancing. The advantage to the medical fields is that they always wear PPE anyway, so it's not really new for them. So that's been a real relief that we've been able to go through with clinical placements in hospitals and that sort of thing. So that's been really wonderful, but it has harmed all of us when it comes to enrollment and it comes to student retention and possibly even completion, depending on the institution. Our students, and we hear it over and over again, tend to be people who learn by doing. They tend to be people who really appreciate hands-on learning. We do have plenty of liberal arts students who are already very comfortable in the remote environment, but a large percentage of our students have never really been in the remote environment, and this is very tough for them. We also have largely non-traditional populations, whether they're older than the age of 24. My institution, for instance, the median age is 29 to 30. This means that that's the midpoint of the age of my students. So half of the students are above the age of 30. This means that they're married or single parents. They have children at home. Institutions such as ours generally have high Pell rates, which is an indicator of poverty or other deficits that students might come to us with. And we are responsible. We are the set of institutions in higher education that have some of the steepest hills to climb with our students, and we get some of the fewest resources. But we do it because we love the work. And that's one thing that's come through with Stcc is the passion that the faculty and staff feel for their work, and the senior administration, that they really care about what it is that they do and what the mission is. And I am sure the Board of Trustees, each member feels very much the same way. And I think that is about where I should stop, and then I can take any questions you may have.
So I know that some of us did participate in some of the individual meetings today. Just kind of open it up to any of the trustees. You have the entire visiting team here. Any clarifications that Dr. Hopper and the team can provide, if you have any, I turn it over to the trustees.
Good evening. This is Max Starks, and I appreciate the overview you just gave, Dr. Hopper. It was very helpful. I guess I'm curious. You mentioned a couple of times, candor, and forthcoming. Is that something that you felt is extraordinary or unlike what you've seen in other engagements? Or you mentioned it a few times. I want to make sure I'm clear on your interpretation of that.
It's not that it's rare, it's something that I ask of the institutions before we even arrive. When I met with Dr. Cook and his team folks working on the accreditation, the self-study. I asked them for candor. And if you read the self-study, you will find that they are very candid about some of the issues that the institution has faced. They're very candid about their data. And I find this to be, in the right environment, is pretty standard. I find institutions, when encouraged to be candid, generally are. There's a certain fear sometimes among whether it's the faculty or the administration, of the accreditation process. It's not uncommon for me or us or whatever team I'm with to go into an institution, and when we're in a meeting, halfway through the meeting or 3/4 of the way through, someone on the institution side will say, "So what do you think of us? Are we going to pass?" And it's a very interesting question, but that's not really the purpose of our visit. And it shows me that there's a certain trepidation or fear of the process, that they feel that this is a test that they must get a certain score, and there's no scale on this. It's merely yes or no. Are you accredited or no, are you not? And if you are accredited, sometimes it comes with certain caveats. But we find that it's easier, and I have never had a problem with this, when institutions admit what they're struggling with, whether it's enrollment decline, which all of us in New England tend to face, whether it's pandemic operations and the expense that comes with them. It's better to talk about them and admit them and talk about how we're coping or dealing with them than to avoid them. And I have found in my experience that none of the institutions I've ever looked at has not been forthcoming. And I think part of it is in the explanation to the group and making sure they understand that we are colleagues first, we understand, but at the same time, we need to be critical in a constructive way. So my hope is that we will be constructively critical of the information we get so that we can help the institution assess itself and do better each year.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. That understood. Thank you.
Hi, this is Trustee McDonald, Dr. Harper. I do have a question while we're on this topic, and you spoke about it's usually either a yes or a no, and sometimes the yes comes with a caveat. And can you just talk a little bit about what that caveat is? Is it some sort of recommendation for improvements, or what does that look like sometimes?
It can be, it depends on the institution. There are a whole range of things. It can be related to finances, and I'm not using any of these examples for STCC in any way, shape, or form. I'm just using random examples that I've seen. It can be related to finances. Does the institution have enough money to meet its purposes and mission? Is the academic program sufficiently deep or broad to achieve its goals? Is the student population able to access the learning that is being offered and succeed in that? So it's questions surrounding those issues. And sometimes if there are problems that are identified that need special attention, those can be pointed out. In years past, there have been different trends over the years. If there's a precipitous enrollment decline, is that permanent? Is it going to happen forever? Or is that something that was a one-time problem that is being addressed? Because enrollment declines also mean revenue declines, right? So they go hand in hand. In New England, we've seen the contracting population generally with regard to age. Maine has seen the contraction almost more than any state in New England. We have a very quickly aging population. Our population pyramid is flipping upside down, so that rather than having lots of young people and very few older people, we have very few younger people and a lot of older people. And what this means is we have fewer and fewer high school graduates coming to our institutions. So these are, if they're systemic issues, what is our plan to address them? Those sorts of things. There are all kinds of issues that can come up. But it's fairly uncommon to have some kind of caveat. It's not fully uncommon, but it is something that happens from time to time. And it's usually something that's noted that in 2 years' time, the institution may be required to write a report or an assessment of how they've overcome it or changed it. One time I was looking at an institution and there were many unfilled positions, fairly essential positions, when we were coming for our external visit. And we wanted to make sure that within a year's time, those positions were filled because according to our team, we did not believe the institution could function fully if those positions were not filled. But that was each institution has so we just wanted to be sure 12 months out, were they able to fill those positions? And the answer was yes, indeed. But we wanted to make sure that they were. It's those sorts of things that crop up that we want to make sure we note, that the institution notes, and that they know to take corrective action.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the trustees?
Just a question. Good evening, Dr. Hopper. You mentioned that it was uncommon to have your trustee meeting in a public forum like this.
Correct.
How did we get to this public forum then? Was this our STC's decision to meet with you in this fashion, or is it something that's Massachusetts based and you look at other states so it's different in Massachusetts, or can you just tell me how we got to the public forum?
This is my first time chairing a visit to a Massachusetts community college. So this is the first time I've encountered this. My understanding is this is a Massachusetts rule that when you have a quorum of your board of trustees, that we need to call, or you are required to call, a public meeting with an agenda, and it needs to be publicly broadcast. So my understanding is we are following the law, and we are doing exactly as you are required to comply with the law in your state. And I think this is really important. I would never want to request anyone to break the law, but in other states that I've been in, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, this is not a requirement by statute or law of any sort. So we're able to have accreditation visiting teams meet with trustees, 1, 2, or even a full quorum of trustees without calling a public meeting.
Great, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think this also gave an opportunity for the entire board to meet with the entire team. I think that is really critical to really understand. I know we've all been a part of this process. And again, special thanks to our study co-chairs, Susan Smith and Christina Atwater, plus many, many more, to put our 110-page submission together. And I think it's a great opportunity to really hear from you, Dr. Hopper, and your team. I know that some of us have spoken to you individually, and you'll be with us a couple of more days. And it was just another great opportunity, Trustee Kraus, just so everyone could put a name, a face, and a voice. Unfortunate in these unfortunate, unprecedented times with COVID and doing things remotely. So I definitely thank everyone for their time.
So I just one final thing on the very last day, which will be Wednesday morning, we will have a meeting whereby I sort of give a hint as to what it is we've uncovered or found or how the group is feeling. And we generally go over a few strong points and a few challenges that we've identified. It is not at all comprehensive. It's just to give you a flavor of where we're going. 9 weeks after our visit, we will submit a report to NECHE, to the commission, and then in the fall, usually in September, October, there's a commission meeting. If we meet in person, it will be in Burlington, Massachusetts. And I will go, and Dr. Cook would go, and we would sit before the commission and be asked questions about the report that we submit. But on Wednesday morning, when I do speak to the group, it's sort of our own kabuki theater. I speak and there are no questions permitted. So it seems very rude, particularly in an academic environment where there's no stupid question. But in this instance, on Wednesday morning, there will be no questions allowed. So it's one of those few times where I get to walk in the room, I talk, you listen, and I get to leave. And it's just the way NECHE does things. I actually think it makes a certain amount of sense. We try to give you a little flavor of what we've looked at in a sense of the high points and sort of challenges we've uncovered. Or perhaps that the institution has self-identified, so that you have a sense. And STCC will have a chance to review our report, I believe 6 weeks after our visit, and can check it for facts and numbers to make sure we get them right. They can't, the institution is not allowed to change the tenor of the report or any of the language unless it's related to facts. And then 3 weeks after that, we submit it to NECHE. So it's an interesting process. But it's one of those things where we want to be collegial. We are your colleagues, yet at the same time, we need to be constructively critical. And it's one of these situations where we have to turn the tables on our own colleagues and look at them critically and help people eat their vegetables, basically.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hopper and the entire team, I want again thank you publicly. You all are volunteers, and we appreciate you spending the time with us and explaining the process to us. I think that's important. We, with our colleagues, have been going through this and preparing for this great time, and we welcome your recommendations that will come on Wednesday. And I wanted again thank you for all of your time tonight.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
And with that, do I hear a motion to adjourn the special meeting of the Board of Trustees?
Motion to adjourn the special meeting of the trustees. Trustee
Do
John.
I hear a second?
I'll second it. Ready?
Great. Can you take the roll, please, Annette?
Yes, Mary Kate Murin,
Yes.
Janae McDonald,
Yes.
Elizabeth Bosito. Yes. Alexander Anderson, Maurice Lindsay,
Yes.
Vicky Krause,
Yes.
Bill Johnson,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler,
Yes.
and Max Starks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. So, please feel free to stay on, everyone, and listen to the Ways and Means. Nanette will let you bring people in if they have been invited. But with that, I will turn it over to Trustee Starks to start the Ways and Means meeting.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Nanette, please let me know once we have.
McDonald.
Oh, good. We have folks already joined. Excellent.
Yes, I've been admitting them, so yes.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone as we begin our Ways and Means Committee meeting. And before we get started, I want to definitely welcome the NECHE Visiting Team as observers of our meeting this evening. And with that, Nanette, please take the roll.
Yes, Janae McDonald.
Here.
Maurice Lindsay.
Here.
Vicky Krause. Vicky Krause.
Here, sorry about that, Nanette.
It's okay. Jeff Sattler.
Present.
And Max Starks.
Present.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nanette. So moving forward, our fiscal year 2021 budget review and update.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
It's
Say one more time, Mac.
Yeah. In the detail on the first page, there's a line item just under $600,000. I'm just curious what exactly that is.
Yep. So that is the required state tuition. We're required to remit that to the state. The three components. In-state tuition, is like an offset to our appropriation. So we're required to actually remit that to the state. Okay. And as far as the out-of-state and reciprocal goes, we remit that as well, but we are allowed to actually
3.8 lower. As far as the revenue expenses, we are seeing reductions in full, awarded about $1.4 million in aid to students from CRISA. So that is the summary. And this is the main report that everybody has had an opportunity to review ahead of time. Do we have any
on board for a couple months and is getting more up to speed? But one thing I like to see on a report like this is what did we say last month, and where does that how does that compare to what we say now? So, Andrew, just something for you to think about as we move forward.
So, and a question for me, I think better than what we were expecting, maybe at our last meeting or two where we thought it would be closer to 15 or greater. Is that correct?
It's a little bit better, yes. But that was just a comparison compared to the budget. Whereas I think what we've mostly been talking about when we're saying like 15% down, 20% down, that's more year over year. So it's just two different ways to look at the data.
Yeah, trustee Krause, what you're going after is exactly what that column I just talked about would give us. So this is what we said the last time we met. This is what we're saying now, and then we can have a conversation around, okay, well, what drove that variance?
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting at is if we're better than expected, my follow-up question would be where, can we identify on the revenue side what's been better than we thought it was going to be? But yeah, I mean, I guess trying to be consistent when we're making comparisons from period to period, that we're comparing the same numbers helps, I think, just frame out those percentage variances here and there, so we know, is it better, is it worse, and then we can drill down into what made it either positive or negative.
Okay, very good. Any other questions on this report? All right, if we can go down to the next slide to look at our facilities projects report. So as of the end of March, we had a spending of about $1 million. And we still anticipate spending another $2 million this fiscal year, with a roll forward of approximately $2 million into FY22.
That was going to be, yeah, that's going to be my question. We expect to spend $2 million over the next 3 months.
Yes. Yes.
And where's that spend going to be focused?
I would have to look at the other report. I spoke with Deb, who is our director of facilities, and she has said that they're anticipating another $2 million in spending. There's a lot of projects in progress. And then a lot of our projects we don't end up doing until the end of the fiscal year after classes are out.
Okay.
But I can follow up with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just that's a lot of spend over the 3 months relative to what we spent so far. So I appreciate you following up on that.
I'll just jump in and say that we can bring Deb back to the next meeting. And I know last time there was some discussion about wanting to see sort of a larger scope of the facilities plan. So she can answer some of those questions as well in more detail next month.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And then if we go to our next slide, please. All right. The next one shows FY22. These are our Dcam state fundings, where for FY21, we received 1.7 million. And then for the 5-year plan, and then we've received small projects budgets of about $5 million. So we've spent about 260,000 so far, with about 2 million to go for this fiscal year, million for FY22, and 2.6 for FY. $9 million may actually get spent into FY22, depending on how the timing of the projects go. Do we have any additional?
None for me.
All right, thanks everybody. If we could advance.
Comments earlier. So just a reminder, we're showing right now a favorable budget. Pretty much every day, every week, we get new information that would change the projection. And so that the assumption around enrollment for spring actually improved a little bit based on what we're seeing for actual enrollment in spring too. So that's just an example of something that's been updated. But I do think that even though we expect the numbers to change between now and the end of the year, we do have enough confidence that we can leverage the strong financial position to make some critical investments now while we have the resources. So some examples include investing in some equipment upgrades and academic programs for the benefit of students and faculty. This would be feeling really obligated to do a safety assessment of Building 20, since that project, is sort of undefined in terms of its timeline. We want to have an assessment of both the sort of structural situation and the mechanicals, just to see what the risk of failure is in those areas, and just make sure we're prepared for making sure the building's safe as we bring more people on. And we also want to get a head start on marketing the reinstated programs. So putting some money into that this year to really strengthen the potential enrollment of those programs. So given that by the end of the year, we'll probably see this $2 million shrink to a smaller number. But we really want to make smart investments now, looking ahead. So really that's just sort of a check-in point about
year when we, haven't spent anywhere near that. So I think big purchases, big things that are, proposed that are going to impact the financial position, I think need to be brought forth in a little more detail, where we are with facilities projects, what are the numbers, what are we doing, how's that money being spent? And then I'm not sure that I understood correctly, but I think you might have mentioned doing a review of some potential needs for building 20 in case we don't move forward with the other project.
It's not so much in case we don't move forward. I think, so this is not the certified study. So just to be clear, I know that there was a discussion about that, and we're not, this is not that. This is really more of a smaller kind of an assessment to just make sure there aren't any safety issues we need to be aware of in the building. So, and at the same time, in parallel, we're still, doing the work to potentially move forward with the Building 20 project, but not getting ahead of the board on that.
The example, the radio station, in the previous report, it shows 20,000. We know it's around 400,000 or so, and you've got a budget that goes year over year. What I'd like to see is whatever projects we're working on, what's the budget, what's the original dollar amount, and what's the work in process figure that we have, which would reflect what we still have to spend before year end and how much carries over into the next fiscal year. Make sense?
Absolutely. So that's at the next meeting, what we can do is have Deb come back and we can look. So last month, bring you the 5-year plan. And so you can see for each project, what, let's say it's a plan that costs $1 million over 3 years. You can see what's been allotted in each of the 3 years. Keeping in mind, though, that, these plans are dynamic, and and our fiscal year end at June 30th is really sort of this artificial milestone date. And so sometimes things don't fall within the fiscal years as we had originally planned, but those projects still, especially the longer term ones, eventually we still need to keep those funds available to complete the projects. But we definitely can bring you back a more detailed facility, spending plan. So we can do that next month. Thanks. Any other questions on this? And I think we're moving ahead on the agenda to the budget discussion. I believe Dr. Cook.
I'm here, Andrew, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. On the front end, I just want to say, express my gratitude to trustees for giving over the time. Obviously, when something happens only once in a decade, it's wonderful to see all hands on deck and your level of investment in these conversations. Thank you for those NECHE visiting team members who have stayed with us. Obviously, conversations that we have had year in and year out at this time about how fungible and flexible the budget is, how it really does move on us all the way till June 30th. And I appreciate that practice point where we really do try to move forward some of the needs in the next year's budget right now. And I think some of the sort of cushion, if you will, that we have is just how conscientious we've been about spending this past year. I'll just amplify what Andrew said about making sure we've got further specifics, particularly on the facilities projects. There's a colloquial term our facilities people use. It's called summer slammer projects, because they really need a sort of less populated campus. Granted, this year has been different, to really get in some of these spaces. And so that's why the encumbrances tend to hit later in May or June and kind of seem to all of a sudden land on our balance sheet. So that's a little bit of context there. I'll help transition. So we've got 3 key points as we look now and toggle to fiscal year 2022. We've got our Dean of Institutional Research and NECHE self-study co-chair, Suzanne Smith, with us. She's going to mostly take questions, I think, the way Suzanne and I have discussed this. You have the enrollment projection for the year ahead, such as it is, such as it's possible, in your packets. And Suzanne's going to give, I think, a brief review and then see what questions you have. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty still out there around vaccination and social distancing come fall. We also have Andrea is going to talk about draft number 2. And of course, for she and I offline, it was sort of revelatory that we are not presenting a balanced budget yet in draft 2, showing just how much work there is still to be done to have what will be in draft 3 next month, a balanced budget for your consideration. Again, one of those key things in there is to freeze fees for students for the year ahead. And then the third is again a dive into capital. We've got our CIO, Mary Kozlowskis, here, who's going to talk. And again, she's got a slide deck that was in your packet around IT capital. Again, another significant area that needs our investment and support. So I won't belabor that. Let me turn it over to Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. And if we could forward through to the slides, what we're showing right here is the document that I know that the board has seen. I think there are some slides at the end. Go. Yes, up, back up. Yeah, on to the next one. Thank you. There we go. So I understand that you've read the projections, and if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to answer. But I just wanted to go through some highlights about what some of the COVID effects were on enrollment that we saw when we really dug into the numbers. So one thing that has always been the easier thing to predict is continuing students. Their behaviors are fairly predictable in terms of their retention from one semester to another. And so we typically see 70% of our fall students return in the spring. And from spring to fall, it's a little bit wider margin, but it's about 48 to 51% of quite large. We don't usually see drops like that. And the way that it reflects in the numbers, this past fall in 2020, we actually had a nearly 16% decline in enrollment, but that was made up largely of new students. So while our spring to fall retention fell, we actually were up last spring in numbers. So there was some mitigating effect because we had a lot more students in spring than we had the year before. So where we really have seen the decline in this past fall was in new students, particularly first-time freshmen. It was a very sharp decline. It was 26%. We then try to, be a little bit more optimistic and say, well, what if we put more weight on what was happening prior to COVID and that we already had a downward decline because of the economy, because of fewer students in the age group that are high school graduates. So what we came up with was a range that is quite wide, 16.2% as a worst case. And if things were to continue as they were prior to COVID, about 7.5%. And so I think we're probably falling somewhere in the middle. Still a lot of uncertainty. When I talked to the Dean of Admissions today, she had said the same thing as she did a month ago, that when she speaks to Springfield High School guidance counselors, the students are still very much in the moment, very much trying to adjust to what's going on today, coming back to in-person classes. They're not thinking yet about their applications to college or what their plans are. And so they have said, talk to us in June when more is known. So that's still a big unknown. She also reports that some of the 4 years are looking at extending their deadlines. And this is true up and down the valley. Other points to make. Why don't I just open it up for any questions about the enrollment projection as it stands?
Suzanne, this is Mac. Very helpful. Thank you for walking us through that. The question I have is really the first two bullets, where we talk about retention rates declining and new student declines. Do we have this by program so we can kind of see, are there particular programs that where we're seeing most of the decline?
We do. So it's the biggest decline is in liberal arts general studies. And then within that, it is the liberal arts program that is seeing the biggest decline, percentage-wise and in raw numbers. Within that school, we also saw it in criminal justice and in business. Those are the top two, but the largest one was liberal arts general studies. It's interesting because nationwide, what they were seeing is the criminal justice and firefighting was one of the biggest declines they saw in community college programs. But yeah, I think it's largely there. And then in the STEM would be second. And I think the health programs have been more holding their own.
Got it. Can you share that data? That's the comparative data, kind of what our numbers look like relative to what you're seeing in the industry. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So in addition to the scenarios that are presented in terms of estimates on where things are going to be, and let's hope that if we've come off sort of the worst year with COVID, as things get better, we're not going to look at a second horrible year down almost 17%. But I guess in consideration of the fact that we're looking at these numbers continuing to be in a downward trend, what are we doing about that in terms of marketing, reaching out to, students to try to find a way to, bring them back? Is it, do we need to go back to in-person? And I know that's somewhat outside of our control, but is that important to the freshman class that they're holding off until they can get on campus? And what is that plan? And are there potential other programs that we could be bringing on board to start up where we see that there might nationally and regionally be growth? I mean, we certainly can't sustain these levels of decline forever and think we're going to remain a viable institution. So it's good that we understand a little bit about what's behind the projections, but what are we doing about that? And how do we stem the tide so that we're not constantly in decline?
I see Suzanne smiling.
Take it away.
This has, of course, been an ongoing conversation for us as an institution for a number of years now, given the trends. What I would say to this important question is we'll be sharing much more on that, including the marketing plan at the, and I'm trying to remember, I'm looking at Denise, when we push that to, if it's the full board meeting at the end of the month, or if we're going to go into May on that.
So no, as of right now, we're scheduled for the full board meeting in April, and I believe it's April 28th, if my memory serves me correctly, or
so certainly on the marketing front.
My apologies, April 26th.
Yep, you'll have a plan and consideration, and by program. And what I can offer, the Cliff Notes version, is we have sought to spend as much as we ever have in the last 10 years. I think we're somewhere in the $600,000 range, including program-specific investments, including those that are being relaunched. So again, we'll definitely work on that. I think as Suzanne shared in her model, it's the retention piece that's as vital as the sort of incoming piece. They really are both hand in glove. And there's a lot of work there. We certainly can give a real breadth of effort that we are trying to sort of invest in all these supports that students seek and benefit from. And we can certainly provide a good deep dive. We do some of that in the internal external committee, but certainly can bring them over here to this committee as well.
John, this is Jeff. Just to speak to that a little bit, but aren't we still at the mercy of our governor opening up the state and the uncertainty of what we think the fall will look like? And everybody is kind of waiting and seeing on how open the economy is going to be by then?
I guess I would say with apologies to Governor Baker, it's It's more what can we have in place to ensure safety, right, of our employees and our students. Right now, we are operating under a 6 feet of social distancing regulation. There is no doubt about that, even though K-12 is at 3 feet. And even though when you go to restaurants, you may feel like, what am I missing? Why are they seeming to sort of better populate at different, our employees and students alike, quite frankly, can really source that.
You know, with any, I mean, it's always tough to predict, but I mean, it's, you know, happen to see that number 4 billboard, you know, on the highway kind of. Any other questions of Suzanne? Excellent. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate it. Moving on.
So if we can go to the next slide, please. Start with reviewing where we are in the budget process. So last month, we presented the first draft of the budget. The baseline budget without COVID relief funds showed a deficit of just under $5 million. And with COVID relief funds, a deficit of about $787,000. A second draft that we're presenting today has a deficit of, in the baseline budget funds, the deficit has reduced to a little bit under $500,000. So we're getting there. There's been an improvement of $310,000 since the last version. And next month we'll come back with the last draft of the budget, and we do expect that to be balanced. And I'll explain some of the details there. So significant changes between last month and this month drafts. We do have a more conservative enrollment projection in this version. So last month we had an assumption of 5% down in 22 from 21. In this version, we actually have taken the most optimistic version of Suzanne's numbers that are more conservative than last month. So we're using about 7.5% down. And you know, we could probably sit here all night and debate what that number should be. But in this version, we are showing lower tuition and fee revenue based on enrollment down 10% in the fall from last year, or from this past year, and 5% in the spring. We also made some adjustments related to scholarships. So normally there's some foundation scholarship revenue in the budget, and given all the COVID relief funds that we have taken the $250,000 of foundation scholarship revenue out of the budget. And we've also reduced some institutional scholarship expense by $100,000. That's all. There's a plan to supplement that with Carissa student aid funds. There are some minor ups and downs in salary and operational expense, and we did receive additional Carissa COVID relief funding of $429,000 for being a minority serving institution. So those are sort of the big chunks of change from budget 1 to budget 2. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So this is really more for your packet, this is sort of the full detail budget here that shows the ins and outs of the COVID relief funding. If we go on to the next slide, it's slightly easier to read. And this is more for people that want to dig into the details. I wanted to provide this for you, but just to orient you, column 1 has the FY21 trustee approved budget. Column 2 has the draft 2 that we're talking about here. So if you look at the bottom line, the deficit of $477,000. The next column shows the variance between this budget and the FY21 budget. And then the last 2 columns show the projection that Jason presented for this year, and then the variance between the FY22 budget and that projection. So I'm not going to go through all these numbers here. But if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them, or Jason can help answer them as well. Otherwise, we can go on to the next slides that kind of give more of a summary of all the changes. So the items in red here are the things that changed since last month, and the items that are not in red pretty much stayed the same. So we already talked about the net deficit improving by $310,000. State appropriation continues to be flat at $28 million. And we talked about the enrollment. Normally, 1% change in enrollment changes the tuition and fee revenue by about $200,000. The reason the tuition and fee revenue has only been reduced by $100,000 is that the 7.5% is now down from a higher FY21 baseline number. So with the projection for total credits in FY21 being a little higher, that sort of reduce the negative impact of the enrollment assumption going down.
Hey, Andrew,
yes.
Question for you. So the second item, state appropriation, when will we know for certainty what that number is going to be? I mean, that's the big nut here, right?
You know what? I'll let Dr. Cook jump in on that one.
I was smiling, Trustee Starks, because from your hopes to the legislators' ears, right? This year, as we know, we didn't hear till January.
Yep.
And painfully, we're at the mercy of that political process. And it may be like that as well as they wait on further federal help. So it is a real bogey, a real wild card for us to have to wait on something so significant that way. And we've taken some of the guesswork out where we're not even going to try to project what that is. We'll just hold it level and then hope that they can match that. I would say if there's exposure, it's that they're going to look at our American Rescue Plan dollars and say, oh, higher ed got X millions of dollars, we'll reduce their appropriation that way. I hope it doesn't come to that, but that would be me voicing what the potential risk and exposure is.
So we don't have a time frame though for when we can even expect to hear something. Okay.
Andrea, this is Jeff. I have a question in regards to the budget too.
Sure.
Are you looking at the numbers from a revenue standpoint based on credit hours or actual student enrollment? Just based on the previous conversation with Suzanne, you know, mixing that all together. Are you focused more on the credit hours or the number of students, assuming that they would have an average credit load of X and looking at your revenue?
The revenue is calculated off of the credits. In terms of, there's a lot of detail. There's sort of this monster spreadsheet that kind of calculates the revenue from that. But if either Jason or Suzanne wants to comment on any of that detail, they can better answer sort of what's behind there if you're interested. But it is the credits. So it's, you know, a revenue per credit kind of a calculation that gets us to the total tuition and fee revenue.
Would you like a little bit more information, or are you happy with what Andrea provided?
Well, I guess we could pick it up at the final draft. I'm just trying to understand and correlate the idea behind, you know, we're down 7.5% from improved FY21 baseline versus down 5% from the first draft. Just trying to understand, hopefully looking at more students coming in and maybe other students that had dropped out and coming back, and really focusing on that total number of credit hours to get us where we want to be in the budget, you know?
Sure. Suzanne has taken in those percentages, Suzanne has taken into account both the head count and the, you know, credits per student, I believe. So yeah. Suzanne, is that true?
Yes. And you know, if we have, there are some students who only take three to 6 credits. So our dual enrollment students or our students who are undeclared. And if we see an increase in that type of student, we might see a decrease in credits per student. So we really do focus ultimately on the credits, but try to look at where they're coming from, how they're getting generated, and from where, from what programs, and from what type of student, being first-time freshmen or transfer students, because they have different behaviors.
Yeah.
I'm mindful, you know, when NECHE talks about right fitness for purpose, I mean, this is what we offer as a community college, the great uncertainty that comes with working closely with our communities as that access point. Nearly 60% of our students are part-time. 6 credits, right, gets them access to federal financial aid, but that wreaks havoc on our planning and modeling, especially when you throw in the other students that are more full-time, let's say taking 9 credits, or as our IR model points out, maybe 9 point and change. So little fluctuations go a long way with all that. And so it's hard when you look at the human being and then you actually look at its translation to the fiscal side of it. It's not always a one-to-one.
Yeah. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
So just, it looks to me like draft 2 is assuming actually a worse operational performance than draft 1, but the offset to a better net is that we're getting more COVID relief funds. Is that fair?
That is true, yes.
So we saw better results in the spring than we were anticipating, but we're giving a draft 2 that's actually worse than draft 1?
Yes, because the enrollment assumption has a big impact on that. So the more conservative enrollment assumption brings the revenue down. And then we also, again, took out that foundation scholarship revenue. So basically what we're doing is we're assuming strategies that allow us to leverage the COVID relief funding while we have it. So normally we would not have taken out, we would accept the $250,000 from the foundation for scholarships, but we've decided since we're getting some other funding, we won't take that, but it doesn't. So that $250,000 is coming out of the baseline budget, but not having it won't negatively impact students. So that's just an example.
Maybe attract more students if we had more scholarship funding though? I mean, why would we give up the 250 even though we're getting a little more in the COVID relief fund unless it's just designated for that specific purpose? If we could then maybe encourage more students to come who then we could retain over the, a period of time. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with draft 2 being worse than draft 1 when we've just talked about spring actually being better than we'd projected, and hope that there's improvement with the vaccine for the fall, and we're going to look at a $600,000-ish marketing budget in our next meeting to make things better, but draft 2 is really worse than draft 1 operationally.
Right. There are a number of pluses and minuses. If we go on to the next slide, we can see what some of the expense impacts are, but it really wasn't. First of all, let me just back up to the scholarship piece. So working with our director of student financial aid, nothing that we've changed in the budget will impact our ability to provide the aid for the students that we otherwise would have provided. So just to be clear about that, with this federal funding, we have plenty of money to support the students who need the funding. So that's not really an issue. I think what we decided was that with respect to the foundation, their money can keep earning money, so we have more in the future. And while we have the federal funding, we would leverage that. So we also have not been ready yet to make some other leaps to more optimistic assumptions on the expense side, which I think is where the work will be going forward. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. But the other things here that have changed, our assumptions around utilities has increased. We also found out about some expected contractual pay increases for one of the union groups that we weren't aware of, and we had to add that expense into the budget as well. So again, every day we learn something new, and we're trying to take in as much information as possible, as soon as we can. And so, all of those things kind of go into, putting this budget together. But as we go forward, I can talk about what our plan is for really refining the budget going forward. So I think I covered the changes on this slide. In the interest of time, why don't we go to the next slide? So on this slide, what I wanted to do is kind of show the breakdown of the different categories of revenue and expense and show how they relate to each other. So if you start on the left, it shows the revenue and builds up the revenue. So the different types of revenue. So we start with $28 million of the state appropriation. On top of that, we have just under $19 million of tuition and fees. And then the other at 1.3 million is things like commissions and, just a conglomeration of very small things. And over and above that is the COVID relief funding that's in the budget. If you kind of take that, so normally we wouldn't have that COVID relief funding. If you take that red line from revenue and you sort of follow it over to the expense, that sort of tells you how much of the expenses are really being covered by our normal revenue. So if you start at the bottom, the expenses related to full-time employees pretty much matches up with the state appropriation. There's also some workers' comp expense in there, stuff like that, but it's pretty close. Then you add on part-time salaries, that's part-time staff and adjunct faculty. Add on top of that operating expenses, which in this graph in the pink includes utilities, and then you can fit in a little bit of capital before you get to that red line. Then over and above that, there's the rest of the capital and other expenses. Other expenses include things like, scholarships and that sort of thing. So, and then we have some direct COVID expenses at 2.4 million compared to the $7 million in revenue. So, you can see here that COVID relief funds to balance the budget. And so I just wanted to point that out. Something that will be important. We're fortunate to have it this year.
This is Jeff. Yeah, one question on that. I guess maybe it's to make up for that within the budget. Is that a correlation that you're looking at for? Yeah.
Math quickly. I mean, it's really going to have to come in. From my perspective, I feel like we're fortunate that the COVID relief funds.
Everyone is struggling with enrollment declines in that trend. The other two, if you'll sort of know again, we have like a 99% acceptance rate at admission. We take everybody that we can. If you have a high set GED, right, or a high school diploma, you're going to be accepted in some form or fashion. You may not be able to get into that competitive nursing program, but we will find a place for you. So it's less on that front end. We will certainly do everything, and we're going to demonstrate how we're doing everything to recruit. But the trend is very concerning, of course, because our ability to carry what we have are.
If there are no other questions, if we can move to the next slide, we'll pay continued attention to enrollment assumptions. And big question marks right now is what will on-campus activity look like next year? This year, our expenses have been significantly lower than we had expected because activity we'll have to figure out, like, what does that do to our operational expenses? And, so we need to really dig into the expense detail to figure out what do we really need for next year. But again, with that question mark, it's a little bit iffy. So, and that's a moving target. The big thing at this point is really understanding the federal COVID relief funding. So right now, the CARISA funds are in the budget. That's the American Rescue Plan funds. We do not have confirmation yet. We have a sense of what that amount will be, but we don't have an award yet. We don't know the timing of when we would need to spend it. So we think the award will be about $14 million, $7 million going directly to students, and another $7 million that we can use as institutional funding. And so in my mind, that's really, additional short-term relief kind of in our back pocket. It's not in this budget yet, but that's the reason that I'm comfortable at this point with using the 7.5% on enrollment, even though that's the bottom end of the range that Suzanne has presented, because if we get into trouble, we will have some other cash. And, it does, again, buy us some time to figure out what our strategy is on the expense side. But the other thing we're looking at is, what are the direct expenses related to COVID? Because if there are relaxed sort of COVID related requirements, if we can reduce the testing costs, if we can reduce cleaning costs, et cetera, then the next draft. But we do plan to bring a balanced budget back a month from now.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrea. I know we're a lot closer on that. So 477 off, don't see that being an issue. So thanks for the walkthrough. Just in the interest of time, it's already 6:33. I know we got a couple of other items to kind of go through here. Can we hit the high points?
I know Mary's teed up and ready to go.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'll just quickly cover the IT master plan and the 5-year capital budget. So the IT master plan, it was developed in 2019. There's workforce development, administrative services, facilities, and aligns with the campus master plan. So on this slide, you see here the 4 goals and the corresponding objectives and key strategies. So since COVID, our priorities have shifted. So I've selected some key objectives here that align with online learning and supporting a remote workforce. So I'm going to just really focus on the first two, the others are there. Goal 1 focuses on aligning the IT strategy and the Stcc mission, vision, and goals. And so during COVID, the goal is to support our students online and those enrolled in low density classes on campus, and to provide access to technology for the remote workforce so we can continue business operations. IT really must be able to fund the critical systems and infrastructure to accomplish this, upgrades, and future growth. Goal 2 really aims to deliver a secure, robust, and flexible IT infrastructure. COVID has caused us to quickly adapt to changing conditions, and the focus is this is such a high priority due to the decentralized environment and operations. So the main focus here is securing the IT environment, ensuring data privacy, integrity, and to mitigate the cybersecurity threats, and to provide high availability, redundancy, and failover of systems. So does anyone have any questions about the IT master plan?
Oh, makes sense.
Okay. So the next slide, please. So as I noted earlier, a goal outlined in the IT master plan is a commitment to fund the IT 5-year capital plan so that we can sustain and grow the IT infrastructure and systems to support the institution. So equipment and end of life cycle replacements are typically done when equipment has failed, and funding for IT systems has historically come from contingency or reserves, but not set forth through the annual capital planning process. So there's a large backlog right now of end of life warranty replacements and equipment and systems. So this is not just a security issue, but outages interfere with the academic environment and business operations when these failures occur. So, and at the bottom, I've also included some future IT projects that are part of the 5-year capital plan. Does anyone have any questions about this? So before I go into detail on the projected fiscal year 22, but you can go to the next slide, please. So I just want to provide some data about IT so everyone has a sense of the current environment and what we support. We currently, and others, 4,200 computers and laptops, 200 switches, 325 wireless access points, 120 servers, over 180 unique software applications, 1,115 phones, 190 classrooms with conference spaces that have some form of technology, over 100 labs and learning spaces, computer labs and learning spaces, virtual desktop infrastructure. Our Blackboard LMS system holds approximately 1,000 unique sections per semester. And the Stcc website has roughly 5,200 web pages, and the portal has over 70. So on the fiscal year 22 proposed budget is broken down into 3 divisions, which represents the IT department. So we have infrastructure, applications, and user support services. So in this fiscal year budget, we have over 14 switches that need replacement, and including cable management that goes along with that. We have a major wireless upgrade of our 2 controllers, and about 75% of the access points have reached end of life, and also the outdoor AP extenders for the outdoor wireless access. We have a phone system software upgrade, and then plans to increase our bandwidth and a bandwidth monitoring appliance. In the applications area, we've started last month the student planning software implementation, and we're also looking at the end of this year for a classroom scheduling software, which currently that process is done manually. And we have a major upgrade to our document management system, which is ImageNow. On the user support academic computing side, we had a large backlog of Windows 10 computers that had to be upgraded. They reached end of support. And also with the addition of so many remote workers, we've had a huge increase in laptop purchases. And also we're planning to implement some video conferencing technology and classroom enhancements to promote asynchronous teaching as we come back to campus. So does anyone have any questions about this slide before we move on to the 5-year budget?
If you had to stop something here, what would it be?
Good question. Some of the projects are already in process. And so I don't necessarily know that I would stop the wireless project, but I might scale that back. And I might consider how we can use some vendors. You know, we're primarily a Cisco shop, So I'd consider using other vendors that are, have a really strong presence in the wireless space. Maybe Aruba, Meraki, some of those systems.
Thank you.
So moving on to the 5-year capital plan. So my goal here is really to just provide a roadmap for the estimated costs needed to fund and sustain the current infrastructure, applications, and user support division. So it's a 5-year view and will likely change, but there are many items on here that are known and will not change. Cost projections in IT more than a year out is very difficult. It's a lot of costs and pricing is based on demand and supply chain issues. But based on the current picture, this is what I'm recommending for the next 5 years. Again, many of the systems have reached end of life: servers, switches, software, phone system, not on the current versions, not scalable for speed or accessibility, and definitely don't have a lot of the newest security features which we need. So does anyone have any questions on the 5-year plan?
I just second you on the security. We have to make sure we have that tight.
Yes.
So I'm glad that's one of the major focus areas.
It is. It's one of my major focus areas. Thank you.
Can I just jump in? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, Mary, this is Jeff. Just a quick question on your budget and then the unforeseen, which looks like 600,000 a year, maybe up to 6, down to 4. Is this all budgeted, planned capital expenditures for IT in the next 5 years? And based on your plan, what have we averaged in the last few years outside of the unexpected?
So I would say that the unexpected, if we could go back to the other slide, the unexpected, I think we're still averaging around $1 million over the unexpected. One of the things that was done, a decision by the previous CIO was to do, instead of purchasing computers, was to lease them. So we're locked into a long-term lease, and that has rolled over to the operating expense. So, that's not really a true picture because it's, this is capital versus the operating. And so the leasing is on there. So I would say that it's a good representation, whether or not, it was planned and funded or funded in an emergency. I would say that that's around $1 million over per year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, a couple process points on that. And obviously it's tremendous to have Mary's talent. And even within this context of the NECHE visit, the fact that we are planning and trying to address these, I think is very different. If you recall, back when we wrote our quote 5th-year report to NECHE, we didn't have a CIO and we did not have an IT master plan. You saw the practice point mentioned tonight. What we would do at about this time of year is see, is the college running a surplus? We would make some investments that way. So very, very ad hoc, not really planning, and with a lot of is built up. So as you see Mary walk us forward to that question, we've done really well to sort of hardline facilities project line of 3.1 million, but the 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 in the years to come, we do not have, let's say, in a draft budget. That is new territory for us to try to absorb, even though legacy, the look back, we were spending somewhere in that vicinity. Obviously, what we want to do is somehow try to keep up with this technology and security need and necessity, but obviously it's going to require some different kind of conversations.
Thanks, John.
Just to add that out of that 1.7 million in the FY22 budget, a little over $1 million actually can be covered by the COVID relief funding. So in 22, in the short term, we can leverage some of that funding to cover things like, expanding wireless and some of the, ability to set up the classrooms for remote learning, things like that. So just so the committee is aware of that.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And when we talk about the next draft of the budget, we should be able to see a clear link between what we're seeing here and how that impacts the budget. So that'd be helpful when you're preparing the next go round of the draft. Great. Any other questions for Mary? Mary, thank you very much. This is very helpful. I'm close to the IT space, so this is very, very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Old business, new business. We have follow-up from March 15th meeting.
I think we actually pretty much covered that in terms of the discussion about improving some of the reporting, but starting in the new fiscal year. So I just
Okay.
really wanted to acknowledge that, we've heard you, and, we're going to be working on that and probably having some additional types of reports for you in the new fiscal year.
Great. Looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate that. Any other new business? Okay, hearing none. Date of our next meeting is May 10th. And do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Great, thank you. Nene, can you call the roll?
Yes, Max Starks,
Yes.
Jeff Sattler,
Yes.
Vicky Krause,
Yes.
Maurice Lindsay,
Yes.
Janae McDonald, and Mary Kate Murin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you all very much. Thank you, Nene. Have a great